Hi faculty, this is a second video about the department head appraisal rubrics, and in this video I take you through the research evaluation, and we're still following the same logic as you've seen before in the teaching as well as the introduction, using that structure of the multiple criteria decision analysis. So let me take you through the parts of this table, and then I'll take you through mostly word by word. You'll see here in this column we have evaluative criteria. I don't quite like the title of that header, but what I mean is we will evaluate your work published or in press, your work that's submitted, in process, and planned. On your creative activities and research, we'll evaluate the quality of the venue and then a long-term impact and trajectory. Now, unlike the teaching where all four categories had the same weight of 25, I assigned different weights for these categories. So I assigned 50% of the weight on work published. And I went back and forth on that. Kelly and I went back and forth. I think Kelly wanted a little lower here and a little higher there. I went back to 50-20 because I think it can add up. But anyway, so half of your evaluation for that year will be on work published. But don't get nervous because we have some cool optimizations here below that will compensate fairly in case you have a slow year because the previous year you did really well. So your work submitted, in process, or planned is worth 20 out of 20%. The quality of the venue is worth 20, and the long-term impact and trajectory is worth 10. And it might be we move this to 10 and this to 30, but I would like a full faculty discussion on these weights, these categories. Now, these criteria we have pulled from our functions and criteria, although in our functions and criteria, we don't discuss this. I think we should, and I think we should because most of us are publishing in mid to tier, and we should be recognized, and that should add to what we're doing. Okay, going back now, following the same structure, we have our criteria, we have our quantitative data, and our qualitative data. The quantitative data simply means number of articles, pages, words, poems, and this is where you all can see how difficult it is for department head to evaluate someone who writes poetry and versus someone who writes nonfiction. And in rhetoric, we'll have an article, a theoretical article, or empirical research study. Literature will have a short critical review. So we're all over the place, but the quantitative data means the number of articles and the number of pages and words. And I probably won't get down to pages or words and some of the things if it's a poem, etc. But there is quantitative data in just numbers. There's a number of articles, pages, words, poems submitted. Okay. This is a little clearer. Most journals have a quantitative ranking. They have acceptance rates and actually have indices for their impact on the field. If we can find that, that's useful. Your long-term impact could include citations if in fact you get cited with that in that first year. But I think you could also put here citations of previous work, and maybe that will count. Well, that will be up for further discussion. Now, there's qualitative data, and here, as you see, I repeat the same thing, but I want to know, with the work published and in press, your effort, the process, and the growth, your own growth. And that sounds funny, but I want to see what that measures. For example, in my work, I tend to publish similar things, but across journals. Different journals and different venues. I'll publish in second language writing and then in rhetorical theory or in globalization. And so sometimes it's not that difficult for me to publish. It's not the same research, but I take my same data and I apply it in different contexts. That's very different than starting from scratch. And so I want to hear the qualitative data of the work that you published, the work that's in press, also the work that's submitted, in process, and planned. This helps me understand the actual quantitative data. If you have qualitative data on the journal's reputation, perfect, or the publisher's reputation. And then if you can argue for how you're carving out space and identity in the field, that's great. Depends on where you are. Some of you can clearly argue this, some of you are just starting. Anyway, so this is the additive. We have the criteria, we have the quantitative, we have the qualitative. Now we go to the formula for converting data into exceeds, meets, and fails to meet expectations. This is where I really struggled and need a lot of help, and of course I had to break it up into two categories because in our functions and criteria we have rhetoric and literature together and then creative writing alone. Now, here's my logic. I want to give you points for what you've published, and to meet expectations in publishing you need 50. And this is what I looked at. If you actually publish a book in rhetoric or literature, that is 3 times what it takes to meet expectations, so it's 150. If you have a book in press, that's 2 times. If you have an article published, that's 1.5 times meets expectations, because that is based on the idea that it takes 3 peer-reviewed journal articles to make tenure. And if you have an article in press, that meets expectations. And I was pretty comfortable with these numbers. I'm comfortable with these 2 numbers right here, but I'm not comfortable here. So does an article equal 5 poems? I don't know. I'm going to need a lot of help from creative writing to figure out how to assess poetry in terms of production as compared to articles. But if a book's published, that's double meets expectations, and creative writing actually have, according to functions and criteria, higher expectations on their publication. So these numbers are correspondingly smaller, but you see the logic is the same. So if you publish an article in a peer-reviewed journal, you get 75 points here, but then you also will get points depending on, we will assess points depending on the venue. So that's not where it stops. Now, you get credit, as you should, we should, on what you've submitted, what's in process, and what's planned. And this list isn't exhaustive, and maybe we can flesh this out more. But my thought was a book proposal submitted is almost like getting, it's 60% of getting an article published. Or an article submitted is 30 points, an article chapter written is 25. There's more points for submission. Article in process 15, detailed plan is 10. The key here is you get points for each one. Let's say you submit a book proposal 1 year and you submit an article and you submit a chapter. If you submitted 3 things, you could get 85 points here. That's great. So the creative writing, I try to do the numbers here. Creative writers, please help me with that. That's tough. But then, as you see, the points go across here. Meet expectations is 50 for published. Meet expectations is 20 for impress. There is a qualitative quant optimization, just like in the previous ones. If, for example, someone wants to argue, rightfully so, that one poem should count as 1 article, this is where I can hear the discussion that one poem, and it might be 25 pages long, should count as 1 article or 2 articles, etc. So there is space for the qualitative to trump or to add to, as well as take away. I don't want to take away, but it can add to the quantitative to go here. So let's say this year you get nothing published, so you got a 0 here. But let's say you submitted a book proposal, you have an article submitted, and you've written an article. You could get 85 here and 0 here, but you would still be meeting expectations in both categories because 85 is greater than 70. Now, we're going to go to quality of venue. These are going to be added up individually, as you can see, and they can add, if you have more than 1, we will just add them up and put them here. But the quality of the venue, I'm going to have to average. So if you have a top peer review journal article, and then if you have a non-peer-reviewed article, I'm going to just average it, and that would probably come out to 20 or something like that. But we will evaluate the quality of the venue, and of course we have the qualitative data check. Let's say you have a 30-page peer-reviewed article and a 3-page invited submission to something that's not peer-reviewed. I'm not going to simply average the 2. I'm going to give much greater weight to the peer-reviewed article, and so this would bump your score up. I'm going to go to the last row. I'm not sure I like this, but I think it's important. I think meets expectations is that you're starting to think about your long-term influence, and you probably won't have citations and references, but you can argue that you're carving out a space, and all the faculty have space they're carving out. I see that. If you have a long-term plan in place and you're reporting your fits this plan, you meet expectations. Now, if you have more than just a plan, we can add to that, and so you can exceed expectations. Okay. So then, like the others, you have a preliminary score. But this is where I think it's gonna really help alleviate, and this was Kelly's idea. I love it. Some of us have a great year one year, and then the next year is a dump because it takes so long to get published, and all of a sudden they're published in the same year. One of the things we want to do, if you exceeds expectation on your previous year's appraisal, we will add 20 points to this year's appraisal or to this year's scores. If you meets expectations on the previous year, we will add 10 points, and all new faculty will simply add 10 points. And so what that does is it creates this connection between years, and this connection is what worries us sometimes, and I think it pushes some people, and it probably pushed me to focus a little bit more on numbers and in quality because I was worried about off years. So these are, I think, really important optimizations, and we can add more. There's also the optimization of your research directly impacts your service. You can add 10%. If your research activities directly impacts teaching, we can add 10%. And here, I will say this is where Kelly and I were thinking about Ryan. Sometimes we get significant and unexpected service loads that impact our research. If we can make that argument, we can optimize it with 10%. So let's say that last year you got a book out, and this year you have nothing published because the book came out. But let's say you have a book proposal, your creative writing, you had 20%. And then let's say that you had 2 articles. So that gives you 60%, 60 points. And then let's say you've got an article in process. You've got 70%. You don't have any venues unless you can argue that the venue's there. But if you have 70 points only because this year's really slow because last year I published a book, we will definitely pull because the book will give you exceeds 20 points. And last year's exceeds expectations will put you into meets expectation easily. And then if you have a little bit more, you could argue for adding to this. So as you will see, we've created somewhat of a buffer or a connection between the years through optimization. Anyway, there's a lot of work to be done in the details and the weights, especially with creative writing. Here, I'm not quite sure I'm comfortable with this. I'm not sure I like this. This might be better as an optimization rather than as a category. Anyway, this is how I'm going to evaluate your research, and just as in the other two, this is the range. If you get above 120, 120 above, it exceeds expectation, and then you'll see the rest of them here. I love the logic of this, the MCDA, multi-criteria decision analysis for research, because it buffers you from year to year, as well as gives you a really concrete idea of what kind of research we're looking for. I hope this has been helpful. I don't have an application because it's so varied, but I think you can apply this really well. I look forward to your comments. Thank you.